The first signs of summer had settled over the small town of Aix-en-Provence, bathing the old stone house in golden light. Isabelle sat in her study, a book in her lap, but she had long stopped reading. Instead, she listened to the distant echoes of youthful laughter drifting in from the garden. Her son Julian was home for the summer, bringing with him his best friend, Leo. It had been years since her house had felt this alive. At 56, Isabelle was a woman of striking elegance. Her silver-streaked hair always perfectly swept back, her movements deliberate and graceful. She had built her life around intellectual pursuits, once a renowned literature professor at the university, now retired, spending her days lost in books, tending to her garden, or enjoying the occasional soirée with old colleagues. But beneath that carefully crafted poise was a deep, gnawing solitude. Her late husband had passed nearly a decade ago, and though she had since adapted to a life of quiet independence, she had never truly moved forward. Julian, her only son, had grown into a man with ambitions of his own, his visits becoming rarer each year. She told herself this was natural, that it was the way of things. And then came Leo. She had known him for years, watching as he and Julian grew up together, inseparable. But time had transformed him from the mischievous boy she once scolded for tracking mud into her house into a striking young man. At 23, Leo carried himself with an effortless charm, his tousled brown hair always falling into his hazel eyes, his smile easy and disarming. He greeted her with a playful grin upon arrival, bending to kiss her hand. The way his eyes lingered on her felt different, though she brushed it off as nothing more than the confidence of youth. But as the summer days stretched on, she found herself drawn to his presence. He was different from Julian. Where her son was serious and reserved, Leo was vibrant, always filling the house with his laughter, his easy humor, his boundless energy. It had been years since she had been around someone so unapologetically alive. One evening, as the cicadas hummed in the garden and the sun cast long golden shadows across the terrace, she sat outside reading. Leo found her there, settling into the chair beside her, a glass of wine in hand. The question caught her off guard. She chuckled, shaking her head. And for the first time in years, Isabelle felt something stir within her, something dangerous. It began subtly. An unspoken understanding, a lingering glance, a touch that lasted just a second too long. They danced around the tension at first, neither daring to acknowledge it, but the pull between them was undeniable. Leo found excuses to stay behind when Julian left for the city. He lingered in the kitchen as she cooked, always offering to help, his hands brushing against hers more often than necessary. He complimented her in ways that felt more intimate than they should have been. She laughed, trying to dismiss it, but the way he looked at her made her pulse quicken. Then came the storm. That night the power flickered, the heavy rain hammering against the windows. They were alone in the house, Julian having gone out to meet friends. Candles were lit, their glow casting flickering shadows across the walls. They sat in the living room, a bottle of wine between them, their conversation unraveling deeper than before. Leo asked suddenly, his voice quiet. She laughed, trying to dismiss it, but the way he looked at her made her pulse quicken. He studied her, his expression unreadable. Then, without thinking, or perhaps with too much thought, he reached forward, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The moment stretched, the air between them thick with something unspoken. She knew she should pull away, say something to shatter whatever was building between them, but instead she let it happen. His lips met hers, tentative at first, a hesitation, as if waiting for her to stop him. But she didn't, and that was all it took. What started as a stolen kiss spiraled into something neither could control. They were reckless, intoxicated by the thrill of secrecy. They met in the stillness of the night, behind closed doors, in whispered conversations that carried the weight of something forbidden. But passion has a price, and it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. Julian wasn't supposed to come home early. Isabelle had grown careless. She had convinced herself that their secret was safe, that the world would never catch up to them, but the world always does. Julian's footsteps echoed through the hallway, his voice calling for Leo. The house was too quiet, and instinctively he knew something was wrong. Then he saw it. His mother's bedroom door, slightly ajar. He pushed it open. Time stopped. Leo standing there, half-dressed, his expression frozen in guilt. Isabelle, wrapped in nothing but a silk robe, her face drained of color. Julian's voice cracked, the words barely a whisper. Julian took a step back, his hands trembling. His gaze snapped to Isabelle, raw with betrayal. She reached for him, but he recoiled as if her touch might burn him. Without another word, he turned and walked away. The front door slammed behind him, and just like that, everything fell apart. Julian never came back. He cut all ties, severing himself from the woman who had once been his entire world. Leo left soon after, disappearing without a word, and Isabelle was left alone. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, became a mausoleum of memories. She spent her days wandering through empty rooms, retracing the steps of a past she could never change. She had thought she was chasing a great story, but some stories should never be written, and in the end she was left with nothing but regret. A life that had once been small had now become unbearable, and there was no going back.